Have you ever wondered what working in Japan would be like? You've probably heard about the tough working conditions, especially as it relates to work-life balance, but there are more fundamental issues in the labor market itself. Hi there, my name is Alexander and I have a bachelor's degree in Japan studies, and in this video we will learn what the Japanese labor market broadly looks like, what its problems are, and why they are despair-inducing, as well as if there is hope for the Japanese labor market. Now, a misconception that people commonly have is that the majority of positions in the Japanese labor market are those of lifetime employment, where people essentially work for one company for their entire lives. And while there were relatively more positions of this type prior to 2000, they have never been the majority of jobs in Japan. With that said, the impact of the lifetime employment system on Japan and the Japanese economy cannot be underestimated. It used to be that the dream was to get a job at a major company in a lifetime position type situation where you would then have job security, benefits for life, assured promotions, and just be on the track to the good career and the good life. And while the attractiveness of these positions has fallen in the many recent decades, many people still desire the stability and predictability of these positions. So I watched a very interesting video recently, which was about the Japanese labor market and how employers don't like Gen Z in the Japanese labor market, in part because they are choosing not to take on lifetime employment positions because they value their freedom more, don't want the long working hours. And while I think that point is very interesting in and of itself, I think it misses a greater point, because being able to say no to a lifetime employment position is a luxury very few have. The reason being that the lifetime positions have been decreasing, not to mention some much more significant factors that I will get to explaining in just a bit. As of 2007, in a paper by Hiroshi, lifetime employment in Japan accounted for about 20% of the labor force. I just said that lifetime employment positions have been decreasing for decades, which is true, but they actually haven't decreased very much, which might make you question my argument about the people choosing not to work them. However, this can be deceiving, because the thing is, while it's only decreasing by very little, the reason is that not very many new people are entering the system. More so, the people already working there, as they are essentially strapped in for life, are not leaving. To give a good metaphor that he also gives in his paper is to think of it as if it was a bathtub. So initially during the 1960s, 70s, 80s, etc., a lot of water, a lot of employees were entering these arrangements. And all the while there was a slight hole at the bottom of the tub where water would be exiting the tub, but it was filling up way faster. Then you got to the peak, you might say, but the hole never got any bigger. You just stopped adding as much water, only a tiny amount. And so that's essentially the state of the lifetime employment system, is that the people who are in the system are staying there and very few new people are getting in, which is why it looks as if it's a stable institution, and in a sense it is, but this is also limited. So eventually, especially with the current demographics of Japan, this is going to change quite rapidly at some point. One of the reasons that people aren't leaving the system is because firing these employees for the companies as well is a really expensive endeavor. Now, one of the reasons that not many people are leaving the system is A, you have the job security. The people who have seniority in the system have accrued a lot of money and benefits. And in Japan, there are very strict protections of workers, especially on very long term or who have worked for companies for a long time, have a lot of seniority. And so if companies wanted to get rid of an employee, that would cost them a lot of money. And then if we get back to younger people entering, even if you are able to enter the lifetime employment type position, although this isn't an official contract, by the way, this is just a descriptor more so. But even if you were able to get into the system, all of the top positions are essentially filled out. And so while you would have great job security, your potential and opportunity for advancement would be very limited. And while you do get a lot of job security, with the limited advancement, you also, as a younger person in the company, will probably be worked like a horse. right? You will probably have to work a lot of overtime and you will have to prove how committed you are to the company because that's almost in the nature of these types of jobs. And so, not the best of deals for a lot of people. Right. So, again, on the positive side, you might say that there's a lot of job security as opposed to freedom. But then, for those who favor freedom, you might say, sure, you have a lot of freedom, but you really don't have a lot of job security. Now, this brings us to both the problems as well as the remainder of if 20% of the labor market consists of lifetime employment positions with limited mobility. What about the rest of the 80%? Now we will change our focus to a separate group of Japanese workers and a separate group of the Japanese labor force. And these are called non-regular workers. We will explore why this system of non-regular employment is problematic for the individual as well as Japanese society and the labor market as a whole. Firstly, what does non-regular worker or non-regular employment even mean? Well, it is an umbrella term referring to a variety of jobs, such as dispatch workers, part-timers, short contract employees, etc. Now, these types of job positions are usually really beneficial to individual companies as they can hire and fire employees according to market fluctuations, and so they can essentially function as buffers for economic good and bad times. Now, that sounds pretty great if you're a company, but this is where we get to the problems. So one can certainly tout the benefits of freedom and being able to move around in the labor market how one pleases, not being bound by anything. And this can be great, but I think especially in Japan, that proposition might not be all it's propped up to be. And for a couple of reasons. Firstly, temporary or non-regular job positions very often pay very low wages, there are very few benefits, and job security is low. Not to mention something that's quite important, which is there is very limited, if any, on-the-job training and possibilities for advancement. Especially the part of on-the-job training is actually very important. Around the time of the economic miracle, it became customary for companies in Japan, especially those using a lifetime style employment situation, to create their own training programs where companies would invest a lot of resources into training employees, effectively molding raw labor into the skilled workers that the company needed. In other words, Japan developed a system where the companies would take on the burden of educating and training employees rather so than them getting that education and training to some extent at the universities, etc. While I reckon companies everywhere do this to some extent, it's more pronounced in Japan. In many cases, what you have studied at university in Japan will have a quite limited bearing on what you actually end up doing when you graduate. If you talk to young Japanese people who have entered the job market or just any Japanese person working in general, a lot of them will tell you that the thing they studied at university has nothing to do with what they're doing now. Getting back on point, what that means is that if you don't get the at the company training, then that really limits your ways of improving your skills as well as potential for job advancement, valuable experience, etc. You're essentially caught dead in a standstill career-wise, because as you move from temporary job to temporary job, you're not getting any skills that companies are looking for in their regular employed positions. Which means that for the workers who engage in these types of jobs, they are more or less eternally caught in a loop of the same level jobs without any chance for improving their wages or their experience or job career opportunities. One of the reasons that companies have been able to maintain the expensive lifetime employment system is because that they have been able to use temporary workers, dispatch workers, etc. as buffers to take the brunt of the damage when the economy sways and changes. And so they can keep maintaining their workforce while using these temporary workers as disposable. Not to mention that they have to pay a lot less for these day laborers or these temporary workers than they have to do for their regular lifetime employees, thereby also saving costs. While this is clearly bad for the individuals whom this concern, it's also bad for the labor market as a whole because it means that you maintain a workforce of essentially untrained individuals who are not as productive as they otherwise could be. According to a paper from 2016 by Miyamoto, in 2015, nearly 40% of the Japanese workforce were non-regular workers. Hello there everyone. Editing Alexander popping in here because apparently I made a mistake in the citation, so I don't know where I got the number 40% from, because in Miyamoto's own source it says 33.4%, and when looking at more contemporary or more recent numbers, the number of non-regular employment in percentage is 36.7. So yeah, my bad, but on with the video. Now, for the sharp individuals out there, you will notice that 20% lifetime employment and 40% non-regular employment only adds up to 60%. So what about the remaining 40%? The remaining 40% consists of a mix of self-employed people as well as regularly employed people. So there is lifetime employment, which is for life, and then there are just regular employees who don't quite follow the same track, but they're similar. And depending on the paper and the definitions, the lines between lifetime employment and regular employment can get somewhat blurry, which is also why it's often tricky to define the exact parameters. Now, these two sides of the labor market, the regular/lifetime employment side, as well as the non-regular side, make up what is known as the dual labor market, which basically separates those who are on a career track with greater job stability, greater pay, greater benefits, greater most things, and those who are stuck in a loop of not being able to advance, not getting training, etc., which creates a great disparity in the labor market and a very big divide between the two sides. And in a sense, it also creates a situation where, especially if you're young, you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Because while if you're able to gain a job in a lifetime employment situation, right, you will get good pay, you will gain good benefits, and you will have a lot of job security. At the same time, you're probably going to have to work crazy hours, and you will have limited advancement opportunities throughout your work life because all of those top positions are held by an increasingly aging demographic. Because while good pay, job security, benefits, etc., not to mention trust to the company, are factors that lead to increased productivity among workers, some say that those involuntarily work as non-regular workers are 75% less effective or productive than those who are regular workers. Assuming that this is true or even near true, this is obviously bad, not only for the companies, but also for the individuals in this situation. But when it was darkest, there was light. Well, what I'm trying to say is, though a bit weirdly, is that there is hope. In 2019, a new work style reform was enacted. This new act, among other changes to employment law, made it so that unreasonable differences in treatment of regular and non-regular workers was no longer allowed. And for those employees who are working non-regularly or on limited time contracts, they could go to their employer and they had the right to ask and have explained to them why there was this difference in treatment, pay, etc. Additionally, in recent years, the minimum wage has also been increasing, with aims set to increase it even further, which in general is good for these non-regular employees, as many of them, again, are not receiving very high wages. There has also been another reform, colloquially known as the 5-year rule, which essentially states that if a company has employed a non-regular worker or a person on a temporary contract for 5 years, they have to hire them onto the company roster as a full-time employee. This is, however, obviously easy to circumvent by simply firing them before the 5 years are up. And this is a general pattern with a lot of the proposed and enacted acts that the Japanese government do for change, which is often that they lack bite and they're not very hard on the companies, and they don't really do a whole lot. It's mostly fluff, frankly. But a series of changes to the current labor market have been proposed by researchers such as Aoyagi and Ganelli. In their 2013 paper, they recommended this particular model. Let me show you. So they proposed the implementation of single open-end contracts, SOECs. These would be universal contracts offered to all new hires, removing the duality of regular and non-regular. It would include a formal severance pay system where job security and severance pay would increase over time with tenure. This would level the initial playing field, so to speak, allowing all workers the potential opportunity for long-term employment, while allowing companies to unload employees in case of market fluctuations, accommodating both sides. Now, I'm not an expert as far as labor market reforms are concerned, but to me at least, this sounds promising. Will these types of labor market reforms take place in Japan though? I find that unlikely, but one can hope. Alas, one cannot truly understand the Japanese labor market, and especially non-regular employment, without understanding the role of women within this framework, and looking at the way that the jobs of women have developed over time. Because in a way, women have borne the brunt or the burden of the Japanese labor market for decades, and now ironically might turn out to be its saviors. But to find out what that's all about, you can check out this video next.